Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to Room 2. We are getting ready to get started with Yonah Weiss. Yonah, how you doing this morning? Or this afternoon?
This afternoon, I'm great, and I'm in a very interesting location right now, as you can see.
Yes, I see that. Are you still in Denver?
I am in Denver, and I could not find anywhere in this convention center a quiet place, so I decided to just go in my car and do the webinar here. So sorry for the background.
No problem, no problem. Give me 1 second. Let me just step away just for 1 sec. I'll be back.
No worries.
All right, I had to shut the door. We have the 3 other rooms going, and we were kind of picking up some noise from the other rooms there. So how is the Apartmentalize conference going so far?
It's pretty cool. I mean, it's really wild. It's like 10,000 people. It's crazy.
Oh wow. Yeah, and I saw that, and I was like, man, I should have made plans to go out there. So has it been pretty valuable so far?
It has been. It's really, it's geared towards property managers and operators more than anyone else. So you have, obviously networking is great, but you have all the sessions and all the speakers sessions are all somewhat related to, operating business or whatever, operating properties. And so I didn't find it to be extremely beneficial for me personally, but, there's an expo, tons of vendors, and it's just amazing to be with so many people.
Yeah, and I always like learning, all the vendors. I love to see the new technology, especially when it relates to property management. So next year I'll probably check that out and see what's going on.
Yeah, I think they have. I mean, I'm sure they have. This is like the biggest event of the year, obviously, but I think they have other events, more locally, regionally.
Yeah, they do. Well, without further ado, I don't want to hold you up from your topic. I want to give you full time, and I'm assuming you have a PowerPoint presentation.
Yeah, I got it all prepared.
Okay, so I'm going to just introduce those that don't know Yonah. If you don't know Yonah, then you haven't been in the multifamily space very long, because he is prolific in the space. He's everywhere, on LinkedIn and Facebook, and love what you do. It benefits us personally, and it can benefit many of our listeners looking to do segregation studies and learning more about what that means and how it can benefit them. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction. So Yonah is a powerhouse with property owners' tax savings as a director at Madison Specs, a national cost segregation leader. He has assisted clients in savings tens of millions on taxes through cost segregation. He has a background in teaching and a passion for real estate and helping others. So, Yonah, without further ado, I will give it over to you.
All right. Thank you very much, Brandon, for that warm introduction. I am not in a Lamborghini, believe it or not, but it is pretty nice. This is, I don't even know what it is, but it's a nice car. So can you guys see my screen? Does anyone, did I share my screen yet? Or I didn't even share it, did I? I need to share my screen. There we go. Sharing the screen, now we got it. Great. So Brandon, if there are any questions and answers, and I really do encourage the questions and answers, please, please take note of them. And if it's, I don't know how active you're going to be here, but if you are, please take note of that. I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to take note of that. Maybe I can keep the question and answers open. But without further ado, I'd just like to introduce you to the subject of cost segregation. Madison Specs is one of the largest national cost segregation firms. And so I'm, just going to jump right into it. We're going to go into a lot of presentation topics, and even there's some extra topics today that I didn't even put in here, because if you've been on any of my webinars in the past, or you've learned a little bit about cost segregation, I guarantee you today, we're going to leave without, any stone unturned. We're going to try to cover everything from the history to the overview, what it is, going into the tax reform, the recent tax reform, bonus depreciation, and then get into some real life examples what exactly is a real estate professional? Can you benefit from this as much as others? And what are the real benefits of cost segregation? So again, I do encourage you to ask the questions. If it's relevant, I hope someone's going to chime in. I'm not going to pay too much attention to the question and answer box now, but I would like to, keep the floor open for question and answers at the end. So we have allocated special time for that. Just a quick disclaimer, I'm not offering any legal or tax advice. Please consult your own tax professional before doing this. This is educational and it is probably going to be very relevant, but in the end of the day, you have to make your decisions. And some of these laws are subject to change because some of the things we're discussing, there was just a huge tax reform about a year ago, and a lot of things changed through that. So, likely in a year or two or 3 or 5, there may be more that might change. So what is depreciation and what is cost segregation? So before we get into cost segregation, we really have to have a good overview of depreciation and what is it. Depreciation is a requirement by tax law. If you own a property, whether it's an investment property or whether it's a business property, the only exclusion is your personal residence. Anything that is income producing, again, even if it's a business property, you are obligated to take a tax deduction. It's almost like a joke because the IRS obligates you to take this tax deduction, but it's for your benefit. And it's called depreciation. It's based on the fact that things go down in value as time goes on. Okay, so when you have, everyone understands when you buy a car and you drive it off the lot, immediately its value goes down, even though that value is not an inherent value. Devaluation or depreciation, there is still a useful life to a property. And so some of these laws that we're going to be discussing today, they may not even make sense logically. And that's really the unbelievable part of this. There are so many tax laws and tax deductions that we're going to get that aren't even based on logic. The IRS came up with these laws to benefit real estate owners, and depreciation is the biggest of them. And cost segregation is just like a friend of mine likes to call it depreciation on steroids. It's just taking depreciation to the nth degree, to take as much as possibly can legally take that depreciation. So again, let's just do a quick overview of depreciation. When you buy a property, and this is part of the illogical part of it, when you buy a property, the value of that property when you bought it, meaning the purchase price, is taken and then is divided up over a 39-year period for commercial property and 27.5-year period for residential property, which includes multifamily. Okay, I understand that for financing purposes, from a bank's perspective, multifamily is considered commercial, anything over 4 units. However, from a tax perspective, it's considered residential, which means you get an even bigger tax benefit, as we're going to see, for residential multifamily properties more than any other type of commercial property. Now you take that value and you just get a small deduction every single year for that 27.5-year period. That's called depreciation. You take a small deduction. It's not small, something's going to be very large, but it's a fraction of that purchase price, and you take away a little bit every single year to deduct from your income taxes so you pay less tax. That's what it is. Cost segregation is going to be an engineering study of the property where you can reallocate things into a faster depreciation category. So instead of waiting 27.5 or 39 years, you can actually reallocate certain assets, as we're going to see very clearly, into a 5-year period, 7-year period, or 15-year period. There are some other smaller categories, but it's very few and far between, so I'm not going to focus on those. 3-year, 10-year, there's also 20-year depreciation, but the majorities are 5 and 15. So even the 7 is minimal. We're going to discuss it. So just to give you a quick overview of depreciation, let's take an example. If you can see my screen, we have here $1 million purchase price. And I'm actually going to get one of these things over here. I like this spotlight, if I don't mind. There we go. Everyone can see better what I'm pointing to. $1 million purchase price. We always have to take off a land allocation because land does not depreciate. You're left with the $850,000 depreciable basis. That means that's the amount of tax deduction you're going to get over the ownership of the property. So if you were to do straight line depreciation, which is what everyone does, pretty much, if you don't do cost segregation. Now, straight line depreciation means that you're just taking a small amount every year for the next 27 and a half years. So, or 39 for commercial. You would have a deduction from your income tax for this $1 million property of $21,794, or for multifamily, $30,909, which means on that $1 million purchase, you may be making $50,000 of NOI, of net operating income. You may be making $100,000 of net operating income. Right off the top, you deduct $30,000. So from that $100,000 of net operating income, right away, we take off $30,000. You're only taxed on the remaining $70,000. But what if there's a way to actually take away to deduct the rest of that $70,000 and not be taxed on anything? Meaning, as opposed to paying income tax on whatever amount, cost segregation is a way that we're going to see to actually maximize those deductions, especially in the early years, by front loading those deductions and getting the maximum deduction. And this is really one of the ways, cost segregation is one of the ways that the rich stay richer, meaning the people who invest in real estate don't even pay income tax legally on those investments because of this process of cost segregation. And there are many others, but this is the main one. So, you know, like a headline, like Jared Kushner does not pay federal income tax, even though he has a net worth of $300 million net worth and hasn't paid federal income tax for 10 years. So why is that? Because he and his family, the Kushner companies, I know for a fact because they're a Madison client, uses cost segregation because they know that this is the way to not pay income, to use the system to increase depreciation. So everyone needs to know. And when we talk about the magical, okay, the topic over here was the magical power of cost segregation, because it really is magical. It's not logical. There's no reason why you should be able to take a $100,000 deduction from your income tax, you know, just because you bought a property for $1 million. Like, it doesn't really make sense. And so let's go over the fundamentals of cost segregation. You must have an qualified engineer walk the property, because what the engineer is going to do is he's going to take notes, measurements, pictures of everything inside the building and outside the building to reclassify the building into shorter depreciation lives. Again, the two main categories we're going to go into great detail is the 5-year property. That's considered tangible property, personal property. Think about it, anything that is part of the building that is not actually part of the structure. So anything from furniture, fixtures, carpeting, you know, wall coverings, even things like, you know, exit signs, or, you know, special purpose lighting, special purpose plumbing, things that are in the property that are not part of the structure. That's the 5-year property. The engineer will identify all those things and give a value to them, give a cost to them, and that's the name, cost segregation. He'll segregate out, he'll take out those costs from the whole building and say, I'm going to depreciate this cost, this value, at a shorter life. Okay, that's breaking out the components to a shorter depreciation life. Accelerate those tax depreciation deductions, meaning take them over a 5-year period, and then we're going to produce huge income tax deductions from that in depreciation. So again, if there are any questions, please feel free to answer. I'm going to check momentarily, you know, from time to time, just of those questions. So a little bit of a history, okay? There's some cost segregation landmark casing. So a little bit of a history. What is cost segregation and how does it work? Where did it come from? And it used to be called component depreciation, which is really a better name for it if you think about it. Component depreciation. I'm taking the components and I'm depreciating them, as opposed to cost segregation. However, in the early 80s, so there were some forms before the 80s, as we can see from these lists over here. In 1972, there was a big court case. In the 70s, in the early 80s, basically, there was a huge tax reform in the Reagan administration, which created this new system in place, as opposed to just, you know, making these court cases of arguments that we should be taking tax deductions on things that are personal property, as opposed to just lumping everything together into the building like it used to be. So some of these court cases were extremely fundamental in establishing things in the property that you may not even think of as 5-year property, or things that are not part of the structure that should be, depreciated over a 5-year period, as opposed to that 39-year period. So, for example, White Coat Industries, these are many different companies, and I had some notes over here, but for some reason I can't see the notes because I don't have 2 screens, because I'm in my car. Not even my car, I'm in a rental car, because I'm here in Denver. I just literally came, sorry for the diversion, but on Friday, literally a few days ago, made a decision to come to Denver for this huge conference, and it was last minute, so I'm kind of impromptuing the space out of the office, traveling at a rental car, and we're making do over here. Anyway, so no 2 screens, so I can't even see my notes over here. So I don't know off the top of my head what all of these, each one of them did, but I can give you some examples. For example, carpeting or vinyl floor coverings, okay, vinyl tiling. These are things that the IRS now considers, based on certain court cases, that they're 5-year property. It's not part of the structure, and you can depreciate them over a 5-year period. And some of those things, carpeting, vinyl floor, have huge tax deductions, meaning there's a huge value there that we can now deduct. Some other things, for example, special purpose electric. Okay, you have certain type of wiring, or the wiring boxes, okay, electrical boxes. You have special plumbing going on in the property. Even things like, HVAC systems were not originally considered part of, personal property. They were considered part of the main structure, but no longer. There are things that are in the property that, again, we can take the value of them. An engineer can find the value of them and depreciate them on a shorter life. So if anyone wants to go and look this up, okay, I'm going to give you a name. You can look up what's called the Cost Segregation Audit Techniques Guide. The Cost Segregation Audit Techniques Guide is the source for all of the rules. Everything that I'm talking about today and more, you can find over there in the Cost Segregation Audit Techniques Guide. Okay, so I'm just going to write it here in the notes. Cost Segregation Audit Techniques. Is that how you spell techniques? Guide. And you can see that over there. Oh, I just sent it to Brandon. Okay, I'll do it again. I'll send it to everyone. So you can look that up, you can Google that, and in there you can actually find everything that we're talking about over here and more, and you will be able to find these landmark cases if you want to go and do a little more research. Okay, so moving right along, we talked about these different asset classes. Again, there's 2 main categories. There's 5-year property, which is considered personal or tangible property. I'm just going to cover these things at the beginning so we can get to understand what we're talking about all the time. The second category is the 15-year property, which is land improvements. Now, land improvements, right, we said at the beginning that land does not depreciate, which means you buy a property. Let's say you buy a 100-unit multifamily building. You have the building, the structure, all the apartments on it, even if there's a number of buildings, and you have the land that it's sitting on. Land does not depreciate. However, land improvements, what's on top of the land, does depreciate and does take a 15-year schedule to depreciate, which you can take those tax deductions up front. So anything like concrete, okay, fencing, landscaping, pavement markings, okay? We're talking about playground equipment, a swimming pool, railings, retaining walls. This is huge. A retaining wall and fencing can sometimes be extremely expensive, and now you can take that depreciation, those extra tax deductions earlier on. And again, what are we doing essentially with cost segregation? Everyone asks me, what's the real benefit of doing this? Okay, you get tax deductions. What does that mean practically? You know what practically tax deductions means? It means cash. Okay, it means cash flow. You do not have to pay the IRS your hard-earned money if you don't have to. Okay, if they tell you you made $1 million this year, okay, if you're in a high tax bracket, 39%, let's say, you're going to have to pay a check to the IRS for $390,000. You're left over with much, much less than you started with, okay? You left over with a little more than $600,000 instead of that $1 million. Now, on a smaller scale, it's also extremely, extremely important because you want to keep every last dollar that you make. And so this is really a way that we can keep the money that we're making by increasing those tax deductions. Again, the more deductions you have, the less earned money that you actually have to pay. taxes on. Again, it's your money. It's not like the IRS says you have to pay taxes every year. You don't have to pay taxes. You only have to pay taxes on what is taxable. Income is taxable. But if you're a real estate professional and you own real estate, you get extra tax deductions to further lower your tax. So you can go ahead and have a bunch of kids, right? Like me, I have 6 kids, right? Thank God. You get a tax credit, a tax deduction for every kid that you have. I'm not suggesting this is a tax strategy, okay? It costs a lot more to raise kids than it does the little tax deduction that you get from having those kids. But real estate is an actual viable means to get extra tax deduction. The 5-year property category, and this is the biggest, usually the biggest bucket, you know, stuff like building mounted signage, cable TV, closet shelving, decorative lighting, decorative moldings, even stuff like millwork, a mirror, carpeting, ceiling fans, equipment, furniture. There's so much, okay? And a value is taken to that, and sometimes up to 20, 30, 40% of the purchase price of the value of the property can be reallocated to these faster lives and get these tax deductions earlier on. So again, what is cross segregation? It reduces our tax liability, which means we're increasing our cash flow. The more money you have, you can take, instead of paying the IRS, you can take that money and reinvest it into a new property. The time value of money is really what this is all about. Because again, we're not creating new deductions. We are just showing that these deductions exist on a shorter period. Okay, so we are getting the time value of money. And I always like to look at just what is the time value of money. It means that $1 today is worth more than $1 5 years from now. If you were to have the option to get $50,000 today, or you can get those $50,000 every year for the next 10 years, $5,000, which would you choose? I think everyone in their right mind would choose $50,000 today. Why? Because not only inflation, that the $50,000 is actually worth more today than it is 10 years from now, but what you can do with that money, the interest that can be earned with that money, if you invest that money, the multiples that it can make, you can double your money in 10 years. Okay, you could have $100,000 investing in real estate in 10 years from now. So these are really the things, what the time value of money is. So again, it's not, but it's your money. Again, it's your money. So that's the most important thing. It's the time value of money. And it's like, even I like to look at it like an interest-free loan from Uncle Sam. So an interest-free loan is basically saying, yes, I will take that $50,000 now. And in 10 years from now, I will pay it back every year for the next 20 years. Okay, I'll pay back $2,000 every year for the next 20 years. That's what cost segregation is. Now we're going to get into bonus depreciation because this is something that really needs to be discussed. It's something that happened in the new tax reform, and we're going to get right into it. So if there are any questions right now, I see Neil has a great question over here. Let's see if this is something we can look at. So Neil asks, will the depreciation reset after doing a cost seg and the lifespan runs out? If I have flooring or lighting fixtures a span of 5 years, in year 6, can I redo the floors, lighting, and reset depreciation? If the answer to that is yes, does it reset 5 years or 27 years? Is this a viable strategy? Neil hit the nail on the head. Incredible question, and I'm actually going to answer it right now because it is so important. And I'm going to go into this in a later slide, but this is an important question. The question is, if you have flooring, you have carpeting, and in 5 years from now, right, you take that depreciation note, right? You put carpeting in your building, and we value the carpet at $100,000. You take $100,000 of deductions over a 5-year period. At the end of 5 years, you replace the carpets. You put in new carpets. Guess what? You write that off. Whatever's left, the value of that is not much, but you write that off, put in the new carpets. You can do cost segregation again, which means you can now apply the value of the carpeting, the new $100,000 that you put in, that's added to the basis. And if it's added to the basis, usually it's added to the basis and then goes back to the 27.5-year schedule unless you can show through cost segregation that you've put in X amount of money in renovations or whatnot, and you can actually go ahead and put it back on the 5-year schedule. So it's an excellent question, and it's something that people do all the time. If you're doing major renovations, it's a great time to do cost segregation on those renovations because you're going to get those tax deductions earlier on. And now we're going to talk about how it's going to even multiply itself even more so with the bonus depreciation. Okay, so Neil, excellent question. I appreciate it. And I answered it live, so I'm going to click that button. Okay, done. Done. Let's go. Bonus depreciation. Hey, what happened to the bonus depreciation slide? Okay, it's later on. Oh, there it is. Okay, I put it later on because this is like a combination of 2 different webinars. So we're going to get into bonus depreciation, which means bonus depreciation basically means, just a rundown before we jump into it, means that you can get all of those 5-year and 15-year assets, okay, that we talked about in year number 1. Okay, you can get a huge tax write-off, that 20, 30, 40% of the value of the property as a tax deduction in year number 1. I know, it's crazy. If you didn't catch it the first time, if you didn't sink in yet, I'm going to get back to it in a minute. So who should be doing a cost segregation study? So this applies to all real estate owners who have income tax. So if you have a nonprofit, the building is owned by a nonprofit, does not apply. If it's a government building, okay, colleges, universities, whatnot, does not apply, cost segregation can't do it. If you have no income tax liability, let's say you have no income tax, let's say the property's not making any cash flow, any money, there's really, you can do it, but it's not going to be beneficial, because making more income tax when you have no tax liability is basically like, you know, what do they say, like churning water, right? Is that what they say? Milling water, churning water? You're not doing anything, okay? So, but anyone is individual, it can be an estate trust. It doesn't matter what the entity is that owns the property, whether it's a corporation, LLC, they get the tax benefits. So it works differently a little bit for an individual versus an LLC, because whatever the partnership is, and I know a lot of people on this platform today, and anyone who may be watching this at a later point, may be in the syndication business, right? And syndications are usually, you know, there's general partners, there's limited partners, and everyone has a different percentage ownership of the property. They have shares of the property, basically, but the depreciation is usually, and I know there are different structures, legal structures of setting this up, so I'm not going to say this is how it's done, because it really depends on how the legal structure of the property was set up. But if it's set up as an LLC, and then everyone, whoever owns shares in the property, owns a share in the equity of the property, then they get those tax depreciation based on their shares of equity. Okay, so if there are, let's say, 50 people who are invested in one property and everyone has a 2% share, let's just keep it equal, even though the general partners usually have more, let's say just as equal, everyone has a 2% share, then everyone gets 2% of that depreciation. Okay, you invested, let's say, $50,000, right? 50 people, that's a big property, $25 million property. But if you did that, then, you know, everyone put in $50,000, everyone would get a $2,000 deduction right off the top, because that's the 2% of that. I believe that's right. No, sorry. They would get even more. They would get $12,000 deduction that first tax year. So they may be making, you know, a 10%, that $5,000, and get a huge write-off. So it's really going to be extremely beneficial when investing in syndications, as we'll see a little more. So before we get into, you know, all this stuff with cost segregation, and I know we're already knee deep in it, but I want everyone to understand something, that when we talked about at the beginning that this is a way that the rich stay rich, it's because the IRS created this standard called a real estate professional. Okay, the real estate professional is someone, yeah, great question, Troy. We're going to get to that in a second. Stay tuned. I just like looking at the chat. I get a little notification. So sorry if it's distracting for everyone else, but I want everyone to be engaged. I encourage you to ask the questions, because I will look at it, and I really want everyone to, you know, ask those questions. And I know I do talk a little fast, so you have to keep up, but ask those questions, jot it down so that you'll remember it, and we'll get to it at the end. The rich stay richer, which means if you are what's called a real estate professional by the IRS's standards, you can check this box on your tax returns, and it allows you to take tax deductions well beyond the real estate property itself. Now, let me explain that a little further. If you're a real estate professional, according to the IRS standards, we're going to talk about on this slide what that is. You can use depreciation deductions to offset all of your income, whether it's from the real estate, whether it's from any other business endeavor whatsoever. However, if you're not a real estate professional, depreciation and cost segregation, which again is depreciation on steroids, depreciation can only be used to offset income produced from passive income, which means real estate. So that income tax deduction of depreciation can only be used to offset the income coming from the property. So let's say you made $5,000 from your property this year, okay, and you have, $20,000 of depreciation. You can only use 5,000 of the other 15,000. Doesn't go away. You don't lose it, but it puts you in a negative, in a passive loss, which can be carried forward, can be used in future years, or alternatively, there's something called, there is actually a limitation to it. So if you make up to $100,000 of adjusted gross income, then you can actually use up to $25,000 of these losses. You can actually use that to offset your W-2 income or other income from other sources. If you're more than that, it gets phased out up until $150,000 of adjusted gross income. So there is until up to 150, you can't use any of those losses to offset other income. So if you have a W-2 job and you invest in real estate, it's great. You can use those losses to offset your gains, but it's limited to that. So it's a great investment. It's a tax shelter investment. It's not really a tax shelter per se, because that's a word that means something else legally. However, it's a way to shelter the money that you don't get taxed on that money. What is a real estate professional? The definition is you need 2 qualifications. The first qualification is you or your spouse, and this is the greatest part of it. I literally just spoke to someone, today's Thursday, Tuesday, I'm a little whirlwind because I've been traveling around the whole week. On Tuesday, I met with someone in Phoenix, Arizona, and he told me that, he's got a big business. He owns a bunch of pizza stores, a whole chain of pizza stores, makes millions of dollars. And his wife, and he buys real estate, he invests in real estate, and his wife, he made his wife become a real estate broker, get her license. They can claim the status to get that joint income. They file jointly, and therefore they can now become a joint real estate professional. The depreciation they're getting, right, from cost segregation is now being used to offset all of their income, even the income coming from his businesses. Okay, so this is huge. So there's 2 requirements. You or your spouse need to, number 1, work more than half of your time in professional services is related to real estate. Okay, that means you have to spend 51% of your time doing something in real estate. So if you have a W-2 job, it's going to be pretty difficult to also, if you're working 40 hours a week, to spend an extra 41 hours a week involved in real estate. If you're managing multiple properties, it's possible. Okay, I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's going to be difficult. Also do that. And it has to be 750 hours a year during that tax year. So that means you can't just sit on a beach for the rest of your life. If you want to invest in real estate and still get this real estate professional status, you actually need to have working time, so you actually have to account for it. And 750 hours is not a lot. It's about either, depending on how you look at it, it's either 16 hours a week, which is not a lot of time, or about 3 months a year. So you can actually go vacation, travel the world for 9 months a year, 3 months a year work, buy a bunch of properties, and that's it. You're done for the year. Okay. Now, what are these things that consider real trade or business? If you're developing, redeveloping, constructing, reconstructing, acquiring, converting, renting, leasing, operating, managing, brokering real estate, you are considered a real estate professional, those hours you spend doing that. So acquiring it is something very interesting. Let's say you're traveling, right? You're flying, like me, I'm flying to Denver. Let's say I'm flying here to look at properties to acquire. The traveling time is actually part of the time of those hours spent, looking at properties, trying to acquire them, putting under contract, etc., is time spent that you can actually use to be considered part of those hours that you need. But and this is actually what I said before, if you are a passive real estate professional, if you don't qualify this real estate professional status, you're allowed up to 25 passive loss against your major adjusted gross income if it's less than $100,000, etc. And I mentioned this out before, and it phases out up to $150,000. So I had a question over here. No question. Chat? Yeah. Just saw. is against conservation after passing because your limitation of 1031 to exclude where this, yeah. Yeah, so Joel, maybe you can elaborate on that a little further. I didn't see that from Mark Kohler, but I would like to hear a little more on that issue. So Joel, if you have a little time, elaborate on the question so we can get it out here. But the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act made a bunch of changes. Okay? And the one thing, which is the biggest one, which we spoke about briefly, is what's called bonus depreciation. And this allows you, any property that's purchased after September 28th, 2017, are placed in service at that time, can now apply to 100% bonus depreciation. It was changed. It used to be a law that just applied to newly constructed, okay, new development properties. If you developed a new property, you used to be allowed to, with the old tax laws before the reform, to take a 50% bonus depreciation in that first year. However, now they moved it to not only 100%, but they moved it to used property, which means you can buy any property, but it's placed in service to you for the first time, which means, I think, Joel, you're referring to the personal property. Yeah, I'm going to get to that, actually. It's not as straightforward as, I didn't see Mark's video, but I'm going to touch on that briefly because it's not as simple as some people like to understand it. But this phases out, again, back to bonus depreciation, this phases out in 2023. So now it's time to take advantage. Phase out means in 2024, it's going to go down to 80% bonus depreciation. Now, this bonus depreciation, just to reiterate, we mentioned before, any type of property that depreciates less than 20 years can now be deducted in the first year. So again, this means anything that falls into those categories we mentioned before. 5-year personal property, 15-year land improvements, all of that's less than 20 years. All of that can be deducted in the first year. So let's give our example, and I'm going to give a straightforward example later on. Let's say you have $1 million property, okay, $850,000 basis. Again, you would have taken a $30,000 tax deduction doing straight line. Let's say you had $100,000 of income, net operating income from that year. That means you're left with $70,000. With cost segregation, you could actually potentially, depending on the type of property, obviously, you would potentially get $200,000 of accelerated depreciation reallocated to those first 5 years. So again, you can get double that depreciation over those first 5 years instead of $30,000, $60,000, $70,000 during those first 5 years. But bonus depreciation, you can actually get the entire $200,000 in that first year. What's going to happen if you only have $100,000 of net operating income? $100,000 got knocked off right off the bat. You don't pay any income tax that year. The next year it's carried forward, and that $100,000 that you missed, that's left over basically, is carried forward and can be used in the next year. And this, again, bonus depreciation applies to anything that was less than 20-year lifespan. Bonus depreciation is not allowed for property placed in service and disposed during the same taxable year. So if you're doing a flip, you can't do bonus depreciation. You can't take the bonus depreciation and then sell it, and then you have depreciation recapture tax, we're going to touch on soon also, but you can't take the bonus depreciation. They won't allow it. And this does not apply to 1031 exchange or non-arm's length transactions. So that means if you just change your entity, you have a vesting, a title vesting, which means you're just changing, I own it, but now I'm creating an LLC and just placing the property in an LLC under a different name, doesn't work. That's not considered placing in service by you, and so therefore you cannot take bonus depreciation on that change of title. And so someone asked a question over here, and my income, doctor making $73,000, comes to LP in a deal, sounds like qualified depreciation based on AGI above. That is correct, Neil. He does not qualify. He can take those tax deductions. The bonus depreciation will take and offset all of the income coming from the property, and the rest of it is carried forward, okay, is passive loss and is carried forward with him on his K1s, but is not going to be able to be used that year. It can be used on other properties if he has other real estate investments as well, but in that it's not used, it's used to the max on the income from the property. I think Joel asked a question over here about the, questions in the Q&A. But Joel asked a question on the personal property. So there was another, and let me see if I even have a slide on. I'm not sure if I have a slide, but there was another big change. Oh, so this is just the chart over here. I forgot that I put in this chart about the place and service here and how I told you that how it used to be. This was the old law over here. So we don't really need to place too much attention on that. This is the new law. You know, so again, this is the old law if you had a portion that was placed in service. Let's say, for example, you bought a property, excuse me, in 2016 or 2017, before September 28th, and you did, you know, cost segregation, whatever, you did depreciation on it. You can no longer get the depreciation going forward, the bonus depreciation. However, if you do major renovations on that property, the portion of that basis that is placed in service after 2017, you can now get the bonus depreciation on that. But again, after 2023, it's phased out 80%, 60%, 40%, etc. And then in 2028, no more bonus depreciation. So we got to take advantage now, my friends. Now is the time. Net operating losses. Okay, so this is another important thing to realize. Another important thing to realize is that if you're, I'm just playing around with the car here a little bit so it doesn't shut off on me. So I can get the air conditioning. Again, if you just showing up now, I'm in my car, not even my car, I'm in a rental car because I came last minute to Denver for the Apartmentalized conference and I couldn't find any quiet place in the convention center with 10,000 people, as you can imagine. So I opted for the car. And it's not a Lamborghini and it's not even my car, it's a rental car, but it's nice. It's Ford, I don't know what it is. Nice car. So net operating losses. Again, we mentioned if you have extra depreciation, that puts you in a net operating loss. That means it goes into the negative. It creates an imaginary bank account that puts you in the negative, and that's carried forward that you can use in the next years. There was a change in the tax reform that made it that now you can only use 80% of taxable income. That net operating loss can now only be used to apply against 80% of the future income. So it is carried forward and it doesn't go away, meaning that imagine your bank account, those losses do not go away, but you can only use those losses to offset 80% of future income. And then when the property is sold, all of that net operating loss is released. And so it can actually be used in many cases, especially if you're a real estate professional, to be used to offset capital gains, and even used to offset depreciation recapture tax. So there is a big advantage in having a loss, and that's why the news of Donald Trump, right, President Trump, whether you like him or don't, he's, you know, he or, you know, probably more likely his accountants and his lawyers are smart people, okay? Because he has a $3 billion loss, which means he will never pay taxes, basically, because he has such a big loss. There is advantage in having losses that can be used to offset gains, capital gains, other things like that. So it's a big deal. Going forward, there was another change in the tax code, and I'm going to get to the question of the 1031. I just don't even remember if I put a slide in or not, but if I don't put a slide, that's what I'm waiting for to answer your question, Joel, about the 1031 exchanges and the personal property. But the next rule that was very important to understand, and really you should discuss this with your tax advisor, because the question is going to be, does this apply to me? There was something called the interest expense limitation. It used to be that interest, meaning if you have a mortgage on your property, the interest was used. That's a tax deduction, okay? Let's say you have a mortgage on your property, your income, again, we're not talking about personal properties over here, we're only talking about investment properties, business properties. You have, let's say, your interest that you're paying on that. The interest could be used, right, to offset your taxes. Now they changed it that if you can only use there's the interest expense limitation that may apply to you, which you should check. And usually this, comes about if someone is, usually it's if you have over $25 million of income, then it's going to apply to you. But there is actually another case that it may apply to other people. Some want to say that it has to do with tax shelters, but that's really hard to understand. What is a tax shelter? That's something, cost segregation is definitely not a tax shelter. Syndication, someone wanted to claim that syndications are a tax shelter. Syndications, every lawyer tax lawyer or attorney or CPA, besides for one that I'm aware of, said that's not so. A syndication is not considered a tax shelter just because you're a limited partner in a syndication. So this does not apply to you. It probably does not apply to you, but if it does, you should check it out. And you would have to take what's called the alternative depreciation schedule. So that allows you to take, instead of 39-year, 27 and a half years, it goes to 30-year depreciation. Instead of 5-year personal property, it goes to 9 years. Instead of 15-year land improvements, goes to 20 years. It's a different schedule, basically. There's still benefit, but it's less. And okay, so I see there is no slide about the 1031 exchange, so I'm going to speak about that briefly. Okay, and it does have to do with cost segregation. In the one of the rules that was changed in the tax reform was that 1031 exchanges, and if you don't know what that is, a 1031 exchange is a way to sell a property without paying capital gains tax on that by exchanging it for another property immediately. And there's a lot of rules that go into that. I'm not going to get into it at all today. That's not our subject. But it no longer, with the new tax reform, 1031 exchanges no longer apply to personal property. Now, what is personal property? They did not define that. They did not say in the tax reform it no longer applies to 1245 property, which is the tax code that describes all of the things in a building that is 5-year property that we've been discussing until now that depreciated a faster life. What it probably means, and most accountants that I've spoken with, and our company, Madison Specs, has a sister company, Madison 1031. We're qualified intermediaries. They're experts in the field. In fact, the general counsel at Madison 1031 is actually one of the people who, he was a professor and he's testified before Congress, and he's actually one of the people who writes the questions or has written the questions on the 1031 exam for 1031 qualified intermediaries. So he's literally one of the world experts on 1031 exchanges. He said it really applies to, things like movable objects. So, you can no longer 1031 a plane. You used to sell a plane, 1031 to a new plane, a car, equipment, things like that. So there are things in a building, right, in a property that still may be relevant that you can no longer do 1031 exchanges for. For example, appliances or furniture, things that are really movable. And I know there are those, and that's what Joel was alluding to with this video that he saw from someone, that some people want to claim that 1031 exchanges no longer apply to any of the stuff that's cost segregated. Anything that you claim is 5-year property, personal property, it's called personal property because that's the name the IRS gave for Section 1245 property in a real estate. But the law about the 1031 exchanges did not say specifically 1245 property. It just said personal property, and so it's pretty clear that that means movable property. So there is really a lot of stuff still in a building, and I would say even the majority of the things that we do cost segregation on in a building are things that are not really movable. Things like carpeting, things like wall fixtures, partitions, fixtures, lighting fixtures, special purpose, all that stuff is 5-year property, personal property, gets depreciated faster scale. There's no way that that's considered personal property and therefore can no longer exchange it. Now, however you look at that, I'm not saying who's right, who's wrong. There are definitely two ways of looking at it. There are different ways and strategies people are doing now to combine cost segregation with the 1031 exchange in order to maximize their benefits. And you should probably, speak with, me at a later point at a further discussion, or your tax advisor to see what they do on this. But there definitely is a way that it still does apply to certain parts of personal property. And I hope that answered the question. And if it didn't, we can follow up. Yes. Will do. No problem, Joel. Thanks for coming on, by the way, Joel Friedman. Shout out to Joel Friedman, CPA, joining us on the webinar today from Brooklyn, New York. After the acquisition, who should do cost segregation? We said, but when is the best time to do it? The best time to do cost segregation, the best answer I'm going to give is it depends. Okay? A lot of people like to do it immediately upon acquiring a property, and a lot of people what we do is provide a free estimate. Okay, a free estimate, which means you can look and see what the potential tax benefits are going to be even before you buy a property, even before you spend the money to do a cost segregation study. We will show you what those potential benefits will be. And 99% of the time, it's a conservative estimate, and 99% of the time, it's actually going to be more beneficial than what we project in that original projection. So people will ask me, even in the underwriting stage, during the due diligence, when they go under contract in a property, they want to see what those tax benefits are going to be. And we can get that estimate out to you. So, but after the acquisition, that's the best time so you can coop those benefits in the first tax year. Again, after renovation, that was Neil's question. When you do the renovations, you're double dipping. You're getting the cost segregation and, again, bonus depreciation. You put in a new carpet, you can expense, you spend $100,000 on the carpet, that's $100,000 of tax deduction with bonus depreciation in the first year. So it's really spending money, getting it back, getting the tax deduction back immediately. Newly constructed property, obviously you can do, and a look-back study. And someone else asked this question, can you do this? And I'm not sure if I answered that question, but I saw someone ask over here. Yes, Troy, can you go back and do cost segregation? If you did not do it in the first year, the answer is yes. Not only can you do it, it many times is more beneficial to do it retroactively on a property that you had bought a year or 2 or 3 or 5 years ago. Because let's say the property is not cash flowing, you're not making money from it, getting those extra tax deductions will not help you. But what happens next year, you will be cash flowing. You will need those deductions. And not only you can do it going back, 2 important things. Number 1, you do not need to amend your tax returns in order to do that, which is great because you should never amend your tax returns if you have a choice. It's really a way just to get the IRS to audit you if you amend your tax returns. But what we do is file a form, which is called the 3115 form. And this is really great for your accountants to know that we do that as a service because it takes a few hours to fill out that form. It's something that we do every day, all day long for our clients. Thousands of these we've done. So part of our, that's really change of depreciation method, the 3115 3115 form. You do not amend your tax returns. The second important thing to note is what you're doing by doing it retroactively, a look-back study, is getting a huge tax deduction this year because we're retroactively getting whatever we missed. Let's say you bought a property 2 years ago, you didn't accelerate depreciation, now you decide to do a cost segregation, you're going to get those extra 5-year property tax deductions from year 1, 2, and 3 all in one shot. Okay, so it's really a great way to boost your tax deductions if you don't need it. And yeah, this is really what the catch-up look-back study is. You reduce the taxable income all in 1 year, no amended tax returns. Again, file form 3115. I should really look at the slide before I talk. But I don't have 2 screens now, so I can't even see what the next slide is going to be because I'm in my car. Not even my car, it's a rental car. Whatever. Thanks for joining me and having your patience, and you get the good view over here. I'll actually show you the view of the Rocky Mountains if you want to take a look out this window. I'm in Denver here. I don't know if you can see that. In the background over that truck, you probably can't. Okay, over that truck, get the Rocky Mountains in the background. Pretty cool. Beautiful here in Denver. I'm actually not so far from Golden. I went to the Coors Brewery, Golden, Colorado today. A little bit of a tour. So let's go a little further on. We're going to do a little case study. Who's up for a case study? Show of hands. Yes, everyone. Okay, great. No one shows their hands. But I'm going to look at the questions because I see we got a couple questions coming in. Yeah, we took care of that. Answer live. Done. And what was the other question over here? 750 hours. Yeah. Drive said, I'm not driving. By the way, I'm not driving. It's not a Tesla. I don't have my hands on the wheel because I'm parked. Okay? Just to clarify, not driving, that would actually be a little scary to do a webinar while you're driving. Not a good idea. Yeah, I'm going to come to that question. Troy, it's a great question on the 750 hours. Let's cover it at the end. Let's just get through this. We'll come back to that. Multifamily property, and this is a big one. And believe it or not, who should be doing a cost segregation study? I generally recommend it to any property that was purchased for over $1 million. Any property that was purchased for over $1 million should at the very least, to get the free estimate, because you'll be surprised how much tax benefit there can be. Even on a property less than $1 million, there still may be beneficial depending on what the property is, how big it is, single family, generally not a lot there if it's under $1 million. Condos, generally not a lot there. Can be. So check it out. Reach out to me. We'll definitely help you out with the free estimate. But any property purchased for $1 million, significant tax benefits. But this is a kind of a big one because I want to take a big one just to show you the big numbers. Everyone loves the big numbers. And you guys are in the syndications, right? Dan, Danny, Brandon with Hanford Capital, Ranzano Capital. They're buying these type of properties now. 113, right? 221 units. This was in Fort Worth, I believe, or El Paso. I don't remember exactly. And this was, this is actually in El Paso. This property, $313,450. That was his purchase price without cost segregation. The regular straight line depreciation would have been $415,686,000 tax deduction. Now that's huge, right? But if you got a $13 million property, your NOI is probably going to be, and I don't even remember exactly what his NOI was, but probably going to be close to $1 million a year. Okay, so $450,000 is great, but you still have a tax liability of over $500,000. Okay, what are you going to do with that? Guess what? If you're a high income tax earner, you're going to be cutting a check to the IRS for close to $300,000. Not so fun, right? Well, not $200,000. Not so fun. So what do? We came into the property. The engineer, checked out everything, did the entire report, and our report, again, is something, 90, 100 pages long, documenting everything, every detail of the property, what the life is, what the value is into that, and creating this report, coming up with these numbers at the end. You see over here, purchase price, we subtracted 15% for land, because again, land does not depreciate, but the basis was still over $11 million. 27 and a half year, that's 71%. We're left with over 29%, right? Close to 30% of property that was reallocated. So 15-year period, 9%. Again, that's the landscaping. Look at this beautiful landscaping over here. The parking lot, the driveways, okay? The fencing, the retaining walls, sewer drainage, okay? All of that stuff has value and depreciates over 15 years. Okay, swimming pool, again, we said, playgrounds, all that stuff. The 5-year, over 19%, this was $2.2 million of extra, again, this is extra depreciation in those first 5 years. So we created for him over $3.2 million of 100% bonus depreciation. That means from that $1 million income, knocked off right away. So he's got a loss. So next year, all that will come out, and they will get to use that in the following years. But even to do it, splitting it up over 5 years and 15 years, $2.2 million over 5 years, you're looking at about $450,000. Excuse me. So his $450,000 of regular straight line depreciation plus an extra $450,000, instead of having a tax liability of $500,000, you have a tax liability of a few $1,000, $10,000, $20,000, something like that. So there's not really a lot left, and therefore we're paying very little taxes for the first 5 years. Okay, that's the power. Partnership tax issues. These are things that come up. There's a step up in basis. Step up in basis means if someone dies and you inherit a property, there's a step up in basis, which means that, let's say your father brought a property for $100,000, 30 years ago. It's been fully depreciated. You inherit that. It's now looked at what's the fair market value. That property 30 years ago was $100,000. Today it's worth $5 million. Your fair market value is $5 million. Now you get to start depreciation over from day one. When you inherit that property, $5 million extra, you can get bonus depreciation on that step up in basis on that new exchange. 1031 exchanges, this is something we spoke about briefly. Tenancy in common. A tenant in common is really a way to split up a property. It's similar to an LLC, except that each partner in that LLC, they all own the whole property together. Tenant in common means each one of them really owns just a portion, a slice of that property. And it's just a way to actually kind of filter funds into it that anyone can really leave at any time. Whereas in LLC, it's much more difficult to sell out your shares. Here, 1031 exchanges, many people 1031 exchange into a property if two people come together from two properties, they can do a tenant in common and bring those monies into that new property. Short tax years, this means that when you place that property in service, that means the day you buy it, let's say you buy a property today in June, you don't get depreciation for the entire 2019. You only get depreciation from the day that you place it in service for only 6 months of depreciation, basically. That's all you get. In that first year, however, it goes on the back end. The other 6 months goes on the back end. Okay? So in our case, cost segregation, if you were to get a 5-year property, in year number 1, you'd only get a half a year's depreciation. And in year number 6, you would get another half a year depreciation. Okay? Any questions so far? No more questions. I hope you guys are thinking of your questions because we're about to get into the question and answer sections. I see that we got about 15 minutes left. So we're about to get into that question and answer period. Okay, there's a lot of tax estate planning. There, you really should speak with your tax advisor, make sure that you are getting, everything you're doing, your whole tax picture. What should you look for in a cost segregation study? So this is taken directly from the Audit Techniques Guide. Again, I put that in the chat box. You can Google that. There are 13 principles over here that need to go into a quality cost segregation study for the IRS to recognize it. Okay, so one is that it's prepared by someone with expertise. Usually that's an engineer, construction, and they have tax expertise. Like our firm, we have 16 full-time engineers on staff. We have a team of a half a dozen accountants and a whole team of operations that are experts in this. There's a methodology. You need to use documentation, pictures, etc. You need to actually have a use of common nomenclature in the study itself. There's a numbering system. There's all these things. So you can't just like throw a dart at the wall, your accountant, and say, hey, 10% of the property is 5-year property. Let's take that deduction. It won't fly in the case of an audit. Okay? So some people are willing to take that risk. I don't think you should. So what should you look for in a cost segregation company is make sure they have both engineers and tax accountants on staff. A lot of accountants will say they do cost segregation studies, but really they just farm it out to a firm like ours, and they might actually charge you an arm and a leg for it. We generally charge, anywhere. It's not contingent on the savings whatsoever. It's a one-time flat fee. Usually runs between $5,000 and $7,000 per property. It can vary based on if it's a smaller property, it can be less than that. If it's a much larger property, commercial, office building or something, hundreds of thousands of square feet, it can be more than that because the scope of work, the engineer's work is a lot more involved. But generally, 80% of our business is within that window, $5,000 to $7,000. Make sure that it's all in-house, okay? If you want to look for a cost segregation firm, let's say they're not outsourcing. I know there's another big, I'm not going to name any names. That's not what I do, but I know there's another big cost segregation firm out there in the market that they outsource all of their work. But they're a big marketing company, basically, so they get a lot of business. So that's okay if you want to go with that. Ensure there's a feasibility study, the true assessment. Again, like I said, we offer this free feasibility analysis. We'll tell you up front what your potential savings will be. And inquire about audit defense. We have 100% no change in all the times that our clients have been audited. And again, you will not get audited for doing cost segregation because it's part of the rules of the tax code. But if a person gets audited for something else, they will look at the cost segregation study as well. If it fits with all the rules, you have nothing to worry about. And we will stand behind all of our clients and have, if need be, at no extra charge in the case of an audit. What are we looking for in a cost segregation study? We need the closing document, site survey. This is what we need in order the appraisal, depreciation schedules, if it was purchased in a previous tax year, and all that. We can give you a good estimate and need that. This is the actual how it works. Once you engage your firm, how it works is they'll send an engineer to the property, walk the property, take pictures, notes, measurements of everything in the building, come back and keep that report. Okay, they'll prepare the report, the study. That's again 90, 100 pages long. We'll be in touch with the CPA to whatever is needed. Again, doing the look back study, the change of depreciation. We do that as a service if you're doing a property purchased in a previous tax year. A little bit more about Madison Specs, and I see there are a couple questions here, so we'll get to them. We've been doing this for 13 years. We've done over 15,000 studies to date. In 2018, we did over 2,000 studies. Over $3 billion in tax savings. So that's a lot. We've been in the industry, 50, people on staff, all of our accountants, Big Four accounting, and that's really it. Madison Specs is a part of Madison Commercial Real Estate Services. We do conservation, title insurance. You may know Madison Title, especially if you're from Dallas. Madison Title out there, 1031 exchanges. Again, a bunch of other services, due diligence, financial due diligence we do. So let's just get to the questions. I think that's it. Let's get to the questions here. Yes. Any other questions?
Yeah, Neil just put one up in the Q&A box. Can you see that one?
Oh, get it. If I make more than $150,000 AGI, I'm not permitted to take depreciation. So how am I to benefit from depreciation? Our LPs that make more than benefit from depreciation, they benefit from it because first of all, it benefits those who are also real estate professionals, number one. But benefits them because they can use depreciation to offset all the income from the property, okay? And it stays with them. It doesn't go away, the extra depreciation. So if there's extra depreciation, then it's just put into a loss, but it makes sure that they are basically not paying any tax on that investment, the earnings coming from that investment, basically for the first 5 years, at least. Another question. If you buy a complex and plan to do renovation in the first 12 months, should you constantly study, purchase, and then do a CapEx as spent? Yes, that's an excellent question. I kind of answered that briefly for Neil, who asked it earlier on, but yes, there's actually 2 stages when you're doing major renovations or planning major renovations on the property. You should actually do it, conservation, in 2 stages. We'll do an acquisition, study the purchase of the property, as is on, basically on day one. The engineer will come in as soon as possible. And furthermore, you can get on the renovations, the CapEx that was spent, a second study, which is really a fraction of the price. We do it because it's already looking at the building as is and just adding on to it. And you can get basically the tax deductions on all the money that was spent. So that's 2 steps to do, and we can do that, from the beginning, get the engineer to come in at a later point. Did we answer all the questions, Brandon?
Yeah, I think you got everything, Neil. Always great to hear your presentation. I know we've got you answered some of my questions actually. I see Troy. Sorry, yes, Troy, you had a great question about the 750 hours. What is considered the 750 hours? Travel time to the property. So there are differences of opinions. I know some accountants are more conservative or more aggressive than others, depending on how you look at it. It has to be the travel time to a property. If it's a property that's owned by you already, then that travel time is usually included. And that's what, 14 hours a week, a little over 14 hours a week. So, I mean, if you're looking at properties or looking at properties to buy or underwriting properties, would that be considered? I mean, as long as you document that. I mean, so it's pretty easy to come up with 2 hours a day in real estate activities to be qualified.
Exactly. Yeah. But again, you need both qualifications. Okay, you need both the 750 hours, and those hours have to be more than 50% of your entire work. So if you have a W-2 job and you're trying to get the real estate professional status, it's very difficult because you're going to have to put in 40 hours a week, 41 hours a week in real estate in order to get those hours.
So we've seen that work with, if you have someone that's like a stay-at-home spouse,
Exactly.
And so one works a W-2, but the other one doesn't. So they're full-time, they don't have an income, but they spend 750 hours doing real estate work. They can qualify as a real estate professional and file jointly.
Exactly. So if anyone has any questions, please, I'm here for another, few minutes. Please take the time. If not, please feel free to reach out to me if you're not connected already on LinkedIn or Bigger Pockets. If you're not following me already, you should be, right? And we'll, hope to connect further on. I appreciate everyone coming out today. And, please feel free to check out, check out what we're doing.
Awesome. Yonah, thank you so much again. And, enjoy the rest of the conference and have a safe flight back to New York. And, thanks again for your time. Appreciate it.
Okay, my pleasure. I see just one more question came in here. Are things like attending seminars considered towards real estate professional hours? That's a great question. There are definitely, there are certain times when it can be, okay? Especially if you own properties already. If you own properties already, it's much more possible that you can do that, and it's considered like you're going towards that. But something like this is probably much more hours considered. But at another conference, there's a lot of networking going on. It's not necessarily considered the educational part of it. Something like this, where it's pure education, right? Every video that you're watching may be able to be accounted towards that education, which is furthering your knowledge in the subject. That can usually be counted towards that. Again, I'm not an accountant, I'm not giving you tax advice. I'm just telling you what I have heard from some of our accountants and a lot of other accountants I work with. So obviously you have to discuss it with your tax advisor, but there are definitely potential in doing that.
Excellent. All right, well, great questions. And again, thanks, Yonah, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks, Brandon. It's been a pleasure.
We'll talk to you soon.
All right, take care.
All right, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Always a pleasure to have Yonah with us. And don't forget to join us again here at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Todd Dexheimer, who's going to be talking about how to start your building your team. So that's going to be a great session. Room 1 will have multifamily investing from out of state or overseas with Haydar Orkivi. And then room 3, the wealth formula to optimize returns with Buck Joffrey. And Danny's in room 3 and Dan Hanford is in room 1. And they did a little bit switch up in this last session. But please be sure to join us again in those sessions, rooms 1, 2, and 3. And also don't forget to register for the next MFIN. You'll be entered in the giveaway for that. That's nextmfin.com. We already have over 100 registrants for the next session already. So great response there. Multifamily Investor Nation podcast is another way to get entered into the drawing. Just go to the MFIN podcast and post a review. Send a screenshot to Stacy at multifamilyinvestornation.com. You get entered to win in our drawing there. And then participation. The more you participate, the more entries you get into our drawing. So please go ahead and do that. We thank you for your participation so far, and we'll see you again at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time.